Access to Democracy is made possible by donations from the following organizations. Thomson Reuters, a global company with expertise and insight to unravel complex situations in the areas of law, tax, compliance, government, and media. Their worldwide network of journalists and editors keep customers up to speed on relevant global events. Thomson Reuters, The Answer Company. Crutchfield Dermatology, a full-service treatment center and Medi-Spa in Eagan. Their goal is to help you look good and feel great with beautiful skin. With service built around courtesy, dignity, and respect, Mayo-trained Dr. Charles Crutchfield personally treats each patient and is acknowledged as one of the nation's best physicians. The Minnesota Twins are looking forward to another great season in 2023, led by the return of All-Stars Carlos Correa and Brian Buxton. With the return of numerous players who were injured in 2022 and some new acquisitions, another division crown and a return to the World Series are in their sights. Established in 2007, 45th Parallel Spirits was among the first 50 micro-distilleries in the United States. Based in New Richmond, Wisconsin, all aspects of production occur at our facility. If you're interested in visiting and learning more about the 45th Parallel Distillery, please check our website and plan a visit to tour our facility and taste our spirits. Truestone Financial, with locations in Minnesota and Wisconsin, has proudly served its members since 1939. Truestone engages, educates, and supports its members to ensure they have the tools to empower their financial well-being. Truestone Financial, your neighborhood credit union. Learn more at truestone.org.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Access to Democracy. I'm Steve Francisco, your host. It's my pleasure to welcome to the studio today a member of the Eagan City Council and a former guest host or host of this program occasionally too, Mike Supina. Welcome to Access to Democracy.
Thrilled to be here.
I should say welcome back to Access to Democracy. So for viewers who may not be familiar with you, Mike, you actually have some East Coast roots, as I understand it, right? Tell us about that.
Grew up in Staten Island, New York, so one of those places where most people only visit when they're on the ferry. They kind of touch it and just kiss it and then turn around and go right on back to Manhattan.
They ride it so they can get a beautiful view of the Statue of Liberty.
You do get a beautiful view of the Statue of Liberty for sure. For a while I was commuting on the ferry, and that was when they were renovating the Statue of Liberty, so I had a beautiful view of all the scaffolding that was on it, but of course they did a wonderful job. So. And
you earned, well, tell us about your educational background, because you sort of went coast to coast in your education.
Yes, undergrad, I was an undergrad at MIT, studied architecture there. And then
MIT, for those who don't know, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, in a town called Cambridge.
Yes, and actually met my wife there. We were both students, and she was studying chemical engineering. And then I worked in New York for a year afterwards. Then we went to California. I worked there for a year to establish residency, and then I enrolled in grad school there and was there for 2 years at UC Berkeley. So.
Your training, you earned a master's degree in architecture.
Yes, sir.
Trained as an architect and have worked as an architect.
Yes, I worked in almost every aspect of architecture, but looking back, it seems like almost every place I've been at, one way or another, gravitated towards multifamily housing. Sometimes it was senior housing, sometimes it was affordable housing, subsidized housing, military housing. So it seems one way or the other that always happened. And in fact, we were talking before the show about our recent trip to California. I popped into a project that I designed there right before we moved to Minnesota. So this is 30 years ago, over 30 years ago, and it's still there. It looked great. It looked great. I don't want to take too much time, but quick story on that is literally I designed it, and they didn't even build it yet, but when we moved, so it was built while we were here. And the last thing I did at that company is they said, hey, we need a sketch of this so that the client can use it. So I just grabbed the first colored pencils I saw, colored it up probably a little more bright and festive than you normally would paint something like that. Well, it turns out they built it and painted it in those exact colors that I had put on the sketch. So it was kind of really very punchy to begin with. It's not like that anymore 30 years later. They've kind of repainted it a little toned down.
Right,
so,
Yeah. Interesting. You were first elected to the Eagan City Council in 2020. And so if you can kind of give us a quick overview, what are some of the big issues that the council is dealing with here in Eagan these days?
Wow,
We'll
that
hit
might take your whole show.
we'll hit several specifics,
Yeah.
and I'll make sure I interrupt you to ask a few
Yes.
questions. But like right now, what would you say the top one or two issues
Yeah.
or questions are that the council's dealing with?
Well, I'll give you some bullet points. So one is, as you know, Eagan is a nearly fully developed city, and we've been saying that for a while, but it's still true. So redevelopment is becoming more and more important, and of course, where we're sitting right now is kind of Exhibit A.
Exhibit
of
A,
that.
we're in the Thomson Reuters
Yes.
building. Yep.
Yes. So there will be redevelopment happening in Eagan, and I guess what I would append on to that is that Eagan has a really good track record of redevelopment. We're patient, and this predates my time on the council, but of course the Premium Outlets was a redevelopment. The Central Park Commons was a redevelopment.
Blue Cross Blue Shield
Blue
building.
Shield. There's others. Yeah, or even Viking Lakes for that matter. So we wait for the right, scenario to come along, and so far it's always worked out for us. So we hate seeing, disruption and change, sometimes when it looks like, oh no, this is something that we've been, a good relationship that we've had for so many years, but we know will come out in the end.
How does I'm kind of curious, we were talking about your educational background and professional background as an architect. How does that background come to bear in your work on the council?
Well, I'm glad that I've had that background, but I have to be careful not to let it get in the way, right? Because often a lot of the things that come before the council are development or redevelopment issues, and I have to kind of remind myself before we get into that council meeting, I'm not the architect here, I'm not the designer, I'm not the developer, I'm the person who's applying, the city's rules and codes and priorities to what we see here. So I have to kind of stop myself from getting too much into the weeds
Right.
of designing someone else's project. That said, I think having, the professional ability to evaluate things and not just design and the appearance of a project, but even how water might flow off the site or how traffic might work in the site. I think that is an asset. I like to think that it's an asset to the council.
Maybe has some effect or impact on your thoughts about affordable housing, which is a real challenge in suburban communities like Eagan.
Yes.
So that we can have a mix of people who can afford to live here.
Yes, for sure. In fact, my senior or my graduate thesis was on a scheme for affordable housing. This was, of course, out on the West Coast. Whether it's something that's directly translatable to what we do here, I don't know, but it was a good exercise for me to kind of just learn how exactly affordable housing works and all the challenges involved in it.
Unlike some other metro area communities, we've been really fortunate here in Eagan. You all must be doing something right on the city council and city government, because it seems that you've been pretty successful in holding the line on local property tax rate increases in recent years. My question for you, Mike, is how has that been possible in this time of record inflation? As costs have gone up, how have we been able in Eagan to hold the line on property tax increases in a way that we haven't seen in some surrounding communities?
Well, it helps that Eagan has a very diverse tax base, which includes a lot of commercial land, a lot of industrial land, and for until very recently, Eagan was a net importer of commuters, and a lot of folks didn't know that. That might be changing now as the way people work changes, but until probably even just a couple years ago, we were a net importer of commuters, which meant that we had a lot of this commercial industrial land here in Eagan, and they pay taxes at a higher rate than residences do. So that has been a boon to Eagan, and that's something we want to continue. And that's an ongoing discussion on the council as redevelopment comes in. Redevelopment proposals come in. Sometimes it's for residential where there used to be commercial or industrial or maybe even retail, and that's something we have to look at. And we say, well, what's the long-term implications of this as far as our tax.
So a real key to this in holding the line, if you will, is this diversification of the tax base.
Absolutely, yes.
very important point. We've just come through a very difficult winter. Those of us who've grown up in Minnesota, we remember some pretty horrific winters of the past. But this was a long, bitter, cold winter, and thank goodness the snow has melted. Beautiful spring day. The flowers are blooming. The trees are blooming. What's the condition of Eagan City streets in general right now? And did the cost of snow removal exceed what the council had budgeted for this year?
Well, as far as snow melting, I occasionally take a run through the zoo, which is I live pretty close to there.
Pile?
Well, there was a snow pile there just maybe 2 weeks ago.
Oh my goodness!
Just because of where they plow it all from the parking lots. Well, maybe it's gone by now. The city budgets for these kinds of things. I mean, yeah, there was more snow than usual, but the city, our public works people anticipate these kinds of things. And yeah, maybe they need to adjust their budget. Maybe they need to, take some money from something else to kind of take care of some extra snow removal. But they have enough flexibility there that they can do that. And if something ends up being an additional cost, we have enough reserve to deal with that. So as far as the costs of snow plowing, that wasn't something that was a big hit.
Wasn't a budget buster for the city. By no means. Good.
No, the bigger surprise was our April 1st ice storm, which broke trees everywhere. We lost a big branch on a tree in our yard, and I was kind of upset about it. And then when I drove around Eagan, I was like, oh, we had it easy in our house, because there were whole trees that were split.
My wife and I were very fortunate that we were out of the country at that time when that last storm hit, but we heard about it in South America where we were.
It was nasty.
But I wanted to ask you about the trees because you mentioned there were a lot of trees down, and there still are some trees down. I know there's some city property near where I live off Diffley, where there's still some trees. How quick is the city going to be able to get to those trees and get them removed? Any idea, Mike, at this point?
Well, they prioritize, and it starts with, of course, trees that are
blocking
a hazard or blocking the road,
yeah.
blocking a trail, potential hazards to homes and people nearby. So that, of course, is the first priority. The rest of it, they'll get to, but not necessarily immediately, because like you had mentioned with the snow, it's something that, if they throw everything they have at that, that's, kind of a hit on their capacity to do the work and, potentially even on the budget. But they'll get to all of that. It'll happen. And this wasn't the first time this happened recently.
No,
on August 27th, we had that EF0 tornado that went through Widgeon and Duckwood area, and I did talk to some people I knew in that area and visited one homeowner, and it was pretty bad there. I mean, but it was localized, so the city was able to much quicker get in there and get rid of anything that was blocking the streets and trails, because it was a relatively localized area. Of course, anything that's on private property, that's completely on private property, it's up to the property owner to take care of.
Of course.
And the city, if they need advice on who to call, the city can direct them to how to find registered, tree.
And most homeowners
removals.
Insurance will help cover at least a portion of tree removal if a tree falls in their yard, right?
Well,
I think.
Yeah, I don't want to say yes because I'm not sure. But yeah, I would think if it damages, say their house or their deck or something, yes. But yeah, that's something that's kind of,
that can be
unfortunately
a pricey,
on the homeowner,
issue,
and it is pricey. But so I guess to compare those two, one of them was so localized that the city could clean it up really quickly. But this ice storm, which basically affected the entire city, Public Works can't cover the entire city and take everything down simultaneously. That's fallen on, say, parks and things like that. So they kind of need to prioritize.
So people just have to be patient. Public Works will get to it. They're on top of it.
Yes.
Let's shift gears for a moment. Talk about, I saw on the city website, the city's promoting native plantings and really protecting the role of pollinators in our local environment. Say a word about that, if you would. What is the city doing?
Well, rain gardens is one thing that they're doing. There's a few already in place. City Hall, Cascade Bay, some other spots. Places where turf grass is not required. Of course, on fields, playing fields, things like that, you need turf grass. That's obvious. But any place where you don't need it, the city is looking for ways to kind of convert over time, because it's not something you can do easily, quickly, but over time convert some of that to prairie. I think we have 26 acres of native prairie right now. We have 15 acres of pollinator plantings all around the city. So that conversion happens over time, and it's not just the city that does it. Individuals can do it too. And
Right.
I've been inspired by that. I don't work as fast as the city in my own yard, but in my front yard, I'm like, you know
Right.
what? It's not like I'm playing croquet or kickball in my
Right.
front yard. I don't need a big carpet of grass,
Yeah.
turf grass. So I started converting some of it over to pollinator friendly, and I'm doing it slowly because I don't want to bite off more than I can chew,
Right.
and then end up with a bunch of weeds. So
But this is really important because, I've heard a lot of my neighbors say, we used to see a lot more butterflies in the spring. We used to see a lot more different types of flowers.
fireflies.
And fireflies.
Remember,
I mean,
maybe when you were a kid, when we were a
loved
kid,
it.
they were everywhere.
Yeah.
And,
Well, I grew up in the middle of South Minneapolis.
Yeah.
We had them there.
Yeah.
But that's why this is an important issue, isn't it, Mike? Because you want to protect, try to bring back restoring some of our natural environment
Yes.
here in the city. One of the things that makes Eagan a great place to live. I know the city has been working to clean up some of our lakes. Unfortunately, runoff from fertilizers and that has created big problems with weeds. And I call it scum, but there's probably more scientific terms for it. For example, at Thomas Lake and some other places.
Yeah.
But there have actually been a couple of success stories where the cities have been involved in restoring some lakes in the city of Eagan. Tell us about
Absolutely.
that too.
We have 2 lakes that were taken off the impaired lakes list, and I'm going to get them wrong now, so forgive me.
Wasn't one Fish Lake?
Yeah. And the other one might have been LeMay Lake, but I
Yeah.
don't quote me on it. Don't quote me. Don't put that part on TV. Just kidding. I think it was LeMay.
But 2 lakes.
Two lakes were taken off the impaired lake list, which is great. And actually, just recently, I was at a presentation by Jessie Cayley, one of our water resources people, and she was explaining in great detail how they evaluate these lakes, everything about them, the water clarity, the kinds of plants and animals that are in them,
That's
how
really
you
important
restore
because
them.
you want to be
Yeah.
able to have diverse aqua life
Yeah.
too. You want to have fish in your lakes
Yes.
rather than dead fish floating
Yes.
up from lakes that have pollution.
And we have which you might have seen, a wonderful contraption that's a giant, it looks almost like a giant river boat, and I extracted a promise from her that I would get to be able to kind of accompany someone on that sometime this summer, I don't know when yet, and it goes through the lake and kind of takes up excessive aquatic plants, and especially ones that are kind of not native, and that grow maybe too much because of, like you were saying, fertilizer runoff and
Right.
that kind of thing.
Which isn't that one, I understand
Yeah.
that to be one of the biggest contributors to pollution of our lakes is fertilizer
Yes.
runoff. Everyone
Yes.
wants that bright green lawn,
Yeah.
but the cost of that is that when it gets into the sewers and the sewers run into our lakes or from people's yards running into the lake, then you have these problems with algae growth.
Yeah, and fertilizer, and I guess this is something, since we're on TV, we can tell all the people watching, if your fertilizer kind of over sprays into the road, sweep that up, because you might just think, oh, that's just a few little pellets. Well, look at how many houses are on your street. Every one of those houses, a few pellets in the street, all washes down the sewer. The sewer goes directly to the lakes. So all of a sudden, there's a whole lot of nutrients going into those lakes that we don't want in there.
Mike, I understand that the City of Eagan, the council recently approved a rental registration ordinance. And tell us a little bit about that. Why did the council do that? Why was that necessary? What does it do?
Well, the reason it was necessary, 2 reasons. One is that our housing stock is aging, and we want to make sure when there is rental housing in Eagan that it is up to the livable standards. And we had, I believe, just a voluntary registration before, and some owners registered, some didn't. It was a little bit patchwork, and that's not really enough.
Is it a safety issue too
Yes.
for renters coming into these properties?
Yes, it absolutely is. We want to make sure that if someone's coming in here renting a home or an apartment in Eagan,
It's up to
that they
code.
have everything up to code, and they have smoke detectors and all of those things. Often when you hear about a disastrous fire or something in another city, there's always a follow-up that says their smoke detectors didn't work, or they didn't have fire extinguishers, or their exits weren't properly, able to open them.
Wasn't Eagan sort of an outlier on this issue of rental registration? Because it seemed that surrounding communities, I think Burnsville, Apple Valley, and some other cities, didn't they already have those types of ordinances on the books? So we're just joining what other communities are doing too, for good reason.
Yes, yeah, we're not the in the vanguard of this. We're a little bit of a follower, but that kind of made it even more necessary, because the second phenomena that's going on, and it's happening all over the place, is that corporations, or LLCs, are buying single-family homes and adding them to a portfolio of rental properties. And when you have a city like Eagan had been, which did not have a rental ordinance, that made us very attractive to these property owners, because they'd say, oh, this is great, we can buy there because there's less regulation. And that's not exactly where we wanted to be. We're like, no, we want to make sure that what you're doing here is just as safe as it is in the surrounding communities.
Elsewhere.
Yeah.
I want to ask you too about the SafeCam program. What is the SafeCam program, and why should residents consider registering their cameras at their homes with law enforcement? That's
a very timely question, because just yesterday, with the morning Eagan Kickstart Rotary Club, which I'm a member of, we toured the Eagan Police Department. And I said, hey, great time to get an update on the SafeCam program. So I did ask the officer that was giving us the tour a little bit about it. One thing he said, which might be a little bit different than what's on the website, is he said it's just for businesses. And I know on the website it says businesses and residences.
Right.
So so I'm not sure if there's something there isn't matching up, but I did ask him, I said, well, can the police actually look through someone's camera, I'm going to name a business, I don't know if they're in it, Walmart. Can the police look through all of Walmart's cameras? And he said, no, that's not how it works. The way it works is you just register your camera, and then if something were to occur and the police said, hey, do you have video from 10 p.m. last night because possible criminal activity happened in your parking lot or across the street, it's already set up that they can just send that video.
It's really a way to help ensure the safety of our communities, both residences and businesses, to try to reduce crime or prevent crime from happening in the first place, when they know that these surveillance cameras on homes can record criminal activity.
And it's completely voluntary.
It's not mandatory.
Even if you register and the police say, hey, I want your video from last night, you can say
it's up to you whether or not you want to give it to them. Before we run out of time, we want to talk to you about one of your interests, or hobbies, I should say, is you enjoy making pottery, and you've been doing this at the Eagan Art House. Tell us, what is the Eagan Art House, and what goes on there besides making pottery?
And I wish I had brought some with me to show you, but I would have had to really kind of curate it, because when you're sort of an amateur potter like me, maybe 1 out of every 10 pieces you make is something you want to show to people, and the rest of it you just kind of hide in a closet somewhere. But Eagan Art House is on Lexington, just a little bit north of Diffley, and it's on the west side, and it's literally a little house that's been there for I don't know how long, 1950s. And right now it's 100% pottery studios plus a few offices, actually one office. Used to have other art in there, but after the pandemic, it got too crowded, and they moved some of the art programs to some other city park facilities. So it's all pottery now. Very oversubscribed for not just pottery, but every other kind of art that's happening there. And I'd say by other standards of some peer cities of ours, maybe I'd say a little primitive, when you go in there, you're like, okay.
But it's fun.
The studio's in a former garage, and, so it's time for us, I think, to maybe up our game as far as
But the facility, it's owned by the city of Eagan?
Absolutely, yes. It's owned by the city, yes. It's a part of the city parks department, and the folks that work there.
Just like the Eagan Community Center and other public facilities that people can use. That's really great. Eagan's population is growing older, and there are going to be some challenges coming up as our population ages. The baby boomers, myself included, are reaching that point right now. We're down to just about 2 minutes. Can you quickly summarize what is the city doing to prepare for this huge demographic change?
That's a great question.
And I should have left you with more than 2 minutes, but you've got less than 2 minutes.
Well, one thing that you've seen is probably have seen is senior housing popping up in various parts of Eagan. So, and that's great. That's not the catch-all for, okay, we're all getting older, let's build a bunch of senior housing. We need a little more than that. And we also want to keep our population, we want to attract all types of families to Eagan. We don't want to just say, hey, you've moved here 30 years ago, like me. I moved here 30 years ago, let's just stay here until you age out. You know, we like homes opening up for younger families, and that's happening. In fact, I was just talking to someone right before we got on the air. I mean, there's preschools and still opening in Eagan, still being built in Eagan right now. So someone sees that there's a market still for young families. So the key for attracting young families is good parks, good schools. We have both of those. Housing affordability, that's a little bit harder. A
little tougher.
Everywhere, not just in Eagan.
Right.
So that's something
And actually, these things, when you talk about this kind of diverse community, mix of population, different people, great public facilities, great public services, these are things that keep our property values higher, too.
Yes, absolutely.
So true.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to close on this note, we're down to less than a minute. It seems that the surveys that have been done of residents, they seem to be pretty well satisfied with the services of city government. They're happy with city council. They may not agree with everything, nobody necessarily does. But it seems that we still live in one of the best communities, not only in Minnesota, but in the nation. So we're thankful for that.
Yeah.
Mike Supina, member of the Eagan City Council, thank you for your work and the work of your colleagues on the City Council. You all seem to get along pretty well and do the job of making sure that Eagan stays a great place to live and to work.
Yeah.
So thank you for being on Access to Democracy today, and we hope we can get you back on again.
I'd love to come back.
Thank you,
Steve. Bye-bye.